So here is Rebecca. First they came for the immigrants. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Gregory, and thank you to the Center for Global Justice for having me here today on this rainy day. The subject of my presentation today is First They Came for the Immigrants, an examination of the constitutionality of U.S. immigration policy. We've all heard what's happening in the United States these days, and we can look at immigrants as the test case or the canary in the mine. Minefield works as well. The canary in the mine as far as what's happening. So just to set the scenario, what good are immigrants? We have financial and tax contributions. Immigrants contribute financially and tax to the U.S. economy in great ways. They add $2 trillion a year to the U.S. gross domestic product, and the Cato Institute actually found that. They contribute or they pay over $300 billion in taxes a year, including $11.7 billion from undocumented people. And you might wonder how undocumented people
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Should I stop?
I've listened before, but I can't hear you this time, and I see somebody else has posted in chat. They can't.
It's okay, it's your computer. You might want to adjust the settings on your speaker, because I think everybody else can hear. I'll just continue on then. There might be a question about how undocumented people can contribute to the tax, to paying Social Security, and how that happens is that even if you're undocumented, a lot of people have fake papers, and their employer is taking out their Social Security withholdings from them, and those are contributions that they will never get a benefit from, because if they're continuing to work with this fake Social Security number, it goes into an account and it's just held there. Immigrants also create lots of jobs. 44% of Fortune 500 founders are immigrants or children of immigrants, including Tesla. Immigrants are 80% more likely to start a business than native-born people. They also fill critical labor gaps in the economy. 28% of doctors are immigrants, 73% of farm workers are immigrants, and 25% of STEM workers are immigrants. They, as I mentioned, contribute in taxes, and they are a Social Security lifeline. They contribute $100 billion net contribution over the last 10 years. And just to put that in perspective, my friend Karine, who just walked in, told me that a person making $100,000 a year, which I think is a pretty decent salary, it's going to take them 10,000 years. It's going to take them 10,000 years to save $1 billion. So that's what $1 billion looks like. It's just a number that's beyond the comprehension of me, for sure. And to think that Elon Musk has, what, 40, or on paper is worth $40 billion, that's just unconscionable. So without immigrants, the Social Security would collapse even faster. And this is where we're headed on right now. So. What about the bad immigrants? Immigrants and crime, what the data actually says. You know, right now we are living under a regime that vilifies immigrants and calls them all rapists and murderers and criminals. Undocumented immigrants are 50% less likely to commit violent crimes than native-born citizens. We are living under a criminal myth, a criminal immigrant myth, that immigrants bring crime, and the reality is that first-generation immigrants are actually 25% less likely to be convicted of crimes than third-generation Americans. They are also less likely to be incarcerated. I had my kid give me this number. The native-born incarceration rate is 3 times what immigrant incarceration rates are. So we have 450 per 100,000 people of immigrants incarcerated, compared to almost 1,500 per 100,000. Sanctuary cities, a great target of Trump and his regime, are targeting sanctuary cities, but they actually have 15% lower violent crime rates than other cities. And I want to acknowledge that, yes, criminals do exist within the immigrant population, and MS-13 being one of them, but that represents less than 0.1% of undocumented immigrants. So the question a lot of people ask is, why don't these people coming to the United States get in line? Well, the fact of the matter is there really is no line for them to get into. A poor person from Venezuela, from Mexico, Central America, Venezuela, or any of the shithole countries that the U.S. government talks about is just not going to get a visa to come to the United States. The system is just stacked against them. In my practice, I actually never was successful at getting a tourist visa for somebody. So whenever I meet somebody who has a tourist visa, I'm just shocked at how they were able to do that, because the whole system is just really stacked against them. On top of that, a person fleeing for their life, a person who comes to the United States to seek safety, is actually doing it the right way. No matter how they come into the United States, they are absolutely doing it the right way. They are required to apply for asylum in the United States, and it's irrelevant how they actually get in. So if they've crossed the border at an irregular point of entry, what some people would say if they've come across illegally, and then they seek asylum, that is absolutely okay. What is not okay is the government, U.S. government, putting up obstacles to them being able to get asylum or to even try and apply. Under Biden, there was an application, an app, a mobile app called the CBP One app, and that allowed people to actually get in a line, a virtual line, and allowed them to come and seek asylum in the United States. It did have a lot of faults. People were waiting in dangerous border cities for a very long time, for months at a time. Families were living in camps, but at least it allowed them a somewhat coherent or a somewhat reasonable way of getting into the United States and seeking protection. This, of course, ended on January 20th when Trump took office. People who had been waiting for months and who had appointments on January 20th woke up to find that their appointments had been canceled, and everybody else whose appointments were after that were and left stranded. So immigrants are the test case. This is a poem that you may or may not be familiar with, but it was written in 1948, I think it was, by a German priest who lamented the fact that he did not speak up during the Nazi era, and when they came after him, there was nobody to speak up for him. I want to talk about the big, beautiful bill. I couldn't think of another better word for this horrible thing that's happened, but it's really changed the whole landscape of the U.S. political system. It was signed into law very recently on July 3rd, and it's the core of Trump's sweeping tax and spend package. It's major implications for pretty much every aspect of life in the United States. It's characterized by expansive immigration crackdowns, by mass deportations, by border militarization. It normalizes this extreme level of executive power that we're seeing. It erodes the checks and balances, and it's targeting marginalized groups. The effect of the big, beautiful bill is basically a massive militarization of ICE. You know, it's getting rid of everything that we hold dear in the United States, but what really the big focus of it is on the militarization of ICE. The real heart of the bill is this. American scholars for a very long time have thought that our system, the federal system in which state and local governments controlled police powers, that brought us some protection against having a police state and living in a police state. But the Trump administration has done a really good job of figuring out a workaround to these built-in protections. And immigration is the way that they are able to, the president is able to exercise virtually unchecked powers and especially if he's backed by a Supreme Court that's supporting him and a corrupted Department of Justice. And so Congress, with this big, beautiful bill, has given ICE basically unprecedented resources. The immigration enforcement has gone up to $170.7 billion. We've seen a drastic increase in funding for immigration detention. It went from it was at $3.4 billion, and now it's $45 billion for immigration detention. That's an increase of 265% of money is going to detain immigrants. ICE gets more funding in this bill than the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. This bill makes it the largest federal law enforcement agency in the history of the United States. I'm just going to let that sit for a minute because it's kind of overwhelming. But what's the result of militarizing ICE in this way? We see that supply, well, first of all, it's a windfall for private contractors who are, of course, favored by Trump. The supply is creating a demand. When the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem that you see is going to be a nail. So we are building this incredible, enormous detention machine, and so there's going to be political and bureaucratic pressure to make use of this. If you have all these prisons, what are you going to do with them? How are you going to justify having them if you don't fill them with people sitting in these beds, or not beds? Then as the number of raids on the workers and on families escalates, ICE agents, as you probably have heard, they are going to be engaging in more warrantless knocks on doors, searches, and arrests. More ICE agents are going to mask themselves to avoid being held responsible for their actions, and these are abuses that we commonly associate with authoritarian East Bloc police states. The regime is not going to limit the purpose of its growing internal police apparatus to deporting just undocumented people. This is a big, big warning right now. They are not only interested in rounding up undocumented immigrants, they're going to step up using ICE and DOJ enforcements to harass their political opponents. That could be, including elected officials. It can be concerned citizens who are protesting, and I would not be surprised if they're going to use this to subvert future elections if they can. So, as the lawyer, one of my absolute favorite things is the Constitution, and my husband's also a lawyer, and when I was preparing for this, I asked how many constitutions, and we were able to come up with 4 pocket constitutions. So I'm happy to let you, actually I would love if we can pass these around, everybody grab one, because we're going to have a crash course on constitutional law right now. I spent, I think, I was trying to remember, is it 2 semesters of con law in law school, or is it 4? 2 years, is it 4? Is it 2 years or 1 year? 2 years of con law. So I spent 2 years studying constitutional law, and you guys I'm gonna give you a quick and dirty crash course on con law right now, just to keep things a little interesting. So as we talk about I want to talk about where the constitutionality plays into what's happening in the U.S. public sphere right now. So the relevant parts of the Constitution, most of them are in the Bill of Rights, which is the 1st to the 10th Amendments. So the First Amendment, who knows what the First Amendment is? Come on, you guys know what the First Amendment is. Religion, speech, association, and press. Press being a really big one. So the First Amendment to the Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's the religion, abridging freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. In the context of the immigration part, what we're talking about today, we're really, I think, the freedom of speech and the press. And the important thing to know is that this is the government making rules that prohibit this. You know, if I tell Gregory, I don't like what you're wearing right now, and he says, no, you can't say that, that's not a free speech issue, because neither of us are government, and that's just regular speech. Plus, we're not in the United States. So we don't have a constitution here. We don't have the US Constitution here. There is a constitution in Mexico. First Amendment, free speech and press. The next amendment that we're going to talk about is the Fourth Amendment. And this one is, does anybody know what the Fourth Amendment might do? You guys have the little mini constitutions. You can look that up if you like. Oh, okay. So can't hear. Well, nobody here's talking. If anybody says anything in here, I'll repeat it. Yeah, the Fourth Amendment? No. There you go. Law enforcement experience unreasonable searches and seizures, the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the things and people to be seized. This is a really important one in unreasonable searches. So what we're seeing in the immigration context is ICE coming up and arresting people. ICE for a very long time has conflated having an ICE warrant with a judicial warrant. An ICE warrant is a warrant that's issued by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is a branch or is a agency of the executive branch. So it basically falls under Trump, just like the FDA, FEMA, FAA, all of those things. They don't have the power of the courts behind them. The Fourth Amendment applies to government, but courts are the ones who have the power to issue warrants to arrest people. ICE does not have that power, but what they're doing is they're showing this ICE warrant and they're saying, I can arrest you. And it is not something that people necessarily need or should be paying attention to, especially now. If you want to look at what the difference is between an ICE warrant and a judicial warrant, you can look often at the top, it'll say court. The ones that you have to pay attention to say court at the top. At the bottom, they're signed by a judge. An ICE warrant says Department of Homeland Security at the top. It'll be signed by an immigration official at the bottom. A judicial warrant will have the name and a specific place that they're allowed to search, an address, the name of the person, an address. Oftentimes, an ICE warrant won't have an address because an immigrant who's recently arrived here doesn't have an address for them. So the Fourth Amendment protects you from all of that stuff. So the fact that ICE is engaging in this is super, super duper against the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The question is anybody taking ICE to court over the warrant issue? And absolutely. There are a lot of cases. In fact, I had, let's see, I was looking recently at the AP, and they're tracking, just the different cases that are being brought against the administration, or just a note, I don't call it an administration. The better use is a regime, because it is not an administration. We are whether you believe it or not, all signs point to the fact that what is happening in the United States is under authoritarian control and not under an administration, a duly elected administration that we consider to be an operating government. But yes, they are absolutely bringing court cases against this. Sure. Okay, we're going to hold questions into the end, but I believe the ACLU is. I don't know specifically what they're doing, but I'm pretty sure that they are. They should definitely be doing something. Oh no, I've lost my notes. Give me a second. There we go. The next amendment that we're going to be paying attention to, that we're going to be examining in your crash course, Of course, I wanted just to mention, because constitutional law is a very specific and a very complex area of law with a lot of different nuances, we don't look at just the amendments to say what is legal and not, and that's what courts are up to. The Constitution is a living document that's subject to interpretation, and courts see, what was the intent of the people when they wrote the Constitution, how has the law and how has life changed in the course of living through 200 years of having the Constitution, 250 years of it, and so that's where constitutional law and all of that stuff, it's not as straightforward as reading what the Constitution says, but you're getting the quick and dirty, and all of that stuff. The quick and dirty class. Okay, so the Fifth Amendment, does anybody know what the Fifth Amendment does? A lot like the Fifth Amendment, self-incrimination, it's the protection of the right to property. This keeps coming out, sorry about that. No person, and this is the part that we're going to be talking about, no person liberty or property, and nor shall public property be taken for public use without compensation. So due process, Fifth Amendment due process. Has the government done what they're supposed to do before they arrest somebody? There are rules that are envisioned in the Constitution that should be followed, and you need to take steps. So you can't just come in and arbitrarily arrest people under the Fifth Amendment. And it applies, the Fifth Amendment is different from some of another one that we're going to be talking about because it applies to the federal government. The 14th Amendment also has due process, and that applies to state governments. So the Fifth Amendment was designed really to limit the federal power, so prevents arbitrary arrests by the U.S. government. And if we think about what the Constitution, the circumstances under which the Constitution was created was, the colonists had just had a king and they did not want any of that anymore. So they were very, very conscientious about making sure that we were not going to have a king anymore. The next amendment that we're going to talk about is the Sixth Amendment, and this one addresses the rights of accused people in criminal cases. And again, it's another due process one, but it specifically talks about how in criminal prosecutions, the accused shall have a speedy and a public trial by an impartial jury, and they will be informed of the nature and the cause of their accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against them, to have processes for obtaining witnesses in their favor, and to have the assistance of counsel. So all of this is, again, just to make sure that the government is not randomly arresting people and putting people away without telling them what their charges are, as the government, as the regime is doing with immigrants today. The Eighth Amendment is the next one that we're going to talk about, and it talks about excessive bail, fines, and punishments that are forbidden. So basically, excessive bail shall not be required, excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. This is a good example of what we're talking about when it's not so straightforward. What constitutes cruel and unusual punishment? Is sending somebody to a tent camp in the Florida Everglades where there's no air conditioning in a Florida summer? Is that cruel and unusual, or is that just suck it up and live with it? Not having the lights on 24 hours a day, is that cruel and unusual, or is that necessary in the interests of law enforcement? So a lot of these are the balancing acts that courts, when they're hearing constitutional cases, have to compare the two things, which what is important to maintain order and to run a jail or a prison, and what is necessary for basic human rights, and that doesn't violate the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. The 14th Amendment. So the first 1 to 10 amendments are part of the Bill of Rights, and that was written when the Constitution was drafted or shortly thereafter. The amendments that came afterwards were done obviously afterwards, and the 14th Amendment was one of them. That was passed in 1868. The 14th Amendment talks about equal protection, and a really hot topic today is about birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment was created after slavery was abolished, and it was deciding who was a citizen and who was not a citizen. And it held that people who were born in the United States, slaves, were actually citizens. And it's very straightforward in its brevity. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. So the one, I think, sticking point with the 14th Amendment is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So pretty much everybody born in the United States is a U.S. citizen, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are mainly talking about diplomats. Diplomats from foreign countries come to the United States, but they aren't necessarily subject to the jurisdiction of the laws. They have diplomatic immunity, which is a phrase that you may have heard. So children of diplomats who are born in the United States are the only group of people that I am aware of that are not automatic U.S. citizens. But since the 14th Amendment was passed over 100 years ago, everybody born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. This amendment was upheld later in a court case with a Chinese person who was born to Chinese parents in the United States, and they held that, yes, he is a U.S. citizen. So this was, again, created, this amendment was passed in post-Civil War when there was aimed to prevent states from abusing the rights of formerly enslaved people. And the 14th Amendment, as far as the due process things, that applies to state governments versus the federal government. So now that you've had your 5 minutes of con law, we're going to move into a quiz. Is anybody ready for a quiz time? Quiz time. So you ready? Put your thinking hats on. This is supposedly going to be a little bit fun, but I'll give you a tip right now. The answer to every single thing I'm going to say is it's unconstitutional. Okay? Let's play, is it constitutional? All right. The first one that we have here, the first question, armed and masked ICE agents arresting people off of the streets. Is that constitutional? Well, let's go through the questions first for the people who don't hear are us. A, it's totally fine. B, it's probably unconstitutional. C, they can arrest people but only at night. And D, it's okay because they're only taking criminals. Anybody have an answer to this? It's unconstitutional. Do you remember? So just to talk about it, it's a Fourth Amendment violation because the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause for arrests and secret detentions, which is really what's happening with a lot of people. In fact, just last week, time moves so slowly. Last week, one of my neighbors, I live on Avenida Independencia, and his father lives in the United States. He went to his court hearing and he was arrested, and they didn't know where he was for about 48 hours. So, secret detentions, that definitely violates due process. The Fifth Amendment, lack of transparency could constitute a due process violation. We also are talking about case law, Miranda. Everybody's heard of the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be held against you in a court of law. That applies to everybody in the United States. All of these, the constitutional rights applies to everybody in the U.S., whether you are there documented or not, whether you're there temporarily, whether you're in the United States just visiting, or if you are born there and live there. Everybody has the same constitutional protections under the law. So the Miranda right, the Miranda rights, where you are read what you can and cannot do, applies. Generally, that only applies though for criminal cases. So ICE coming and picking up people, they don't necessarily need to read you Miranda rights. The Fourth Amendment violation, protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And so, when we have ICE coming, who are masked, who are not wearing any sort of insignia, who are not showing identification, that, in my opinion, feels like a kidnapping, because they're not saying anything. And so, when you have kidnapping, using that phrase, it suggests that there's a lack of proper legal authority, that there's a lack of due process, that there may or may not even be a warrant. I've seen, again, just time being really weird. I think it was like 2 months ago, there was people in the Berkshires speaking out against the arrest of an immigrant, and they were, hey, show us your warrant. Let's see, why are you taking this person? And they just ignored him. The ICE ignored the people protesting and trying to do this. And now it's become much more common. We're seeing reports, of course, in LA of, people confronting ICE agents and speaking out against it. And that's absolutely justified, in my opinion, and is absolutely necessary. One point to the answer number D, they're not arresting only criminals. In fact, 75% of the people who were sent to CICOT, the notorious prison in El Salvador, had no traces of a criminal record whatsoever. And the government, the regime, knew this when they sent them there. One point that I really want to make is that immigration violations are civil violations. They are not criminals. They are not criminal infractions. If you enter the United States without proper documentation, if you cross the border in the middle of Texas, it's basically the same as a speeding ticket. This is not something that people should have their lives completely ruined and upturned over. So the next question on our quiz, is it constitutional? True or false? Arresting asylum seekers in court. This is a really great way to save time. True or false? Anybody have any thoughts on this one? False, yes. So I think it was maybe 2-3 months ago, the regime put out a notice that previous administrations had designated certain places as safe spaces that were not going to be subject to ICE activity. Schools, churches, hospitals, and courts were places that ICE could not come into for public interest reasons. Schools for obvious reasons, churches, hospitals, you don't want to go in and arrest people at hospitals, and courts were also not places that ICE could have activities in. But what's happening now, so here, you guys got the answer here, it's false. Obviously. This is a violation of due process. Fifth Amendment due process, interfering with court hearings may deny somebody a chance access to a fair hearing. It also violates the right to counsel. If the arrests block a lawyer from being able to speak to their client, then that's a violation of the right to counsel. And there are limits on how long people can be held indefinitely. So these ICE arrests in court are unconstitutional if they're used to disrupt legal proceedings. But let me just tell you what's happening in these cases here. So under the CBP-1 app, when we talked about people standing in line, the United States government under Biden let people come into the country to seek asylum. They were given the designation of an arriving alien, which is somebody coming across the border saying, you're not really supposed to be here, but we're going to give you your chance to explain why, to fight for your right to stay here in court. So all of the people, 900,000 people, which seems like a lot of people, maybe it's 90,000, but a lot of people came into the United States under Biden, under the CBP-1 app. They were given a court date and they were told to show up and, being able to seek asylum. Let's see why you should be allowed to stay here. Please tell us, what harm you suffered in your home country and why you should be allowed to stay here. So these people are following the rules. They're showing up at their court. And in the past, when I would practice many years ago, having your case dismissed was a good thing. because that meant that the government was like, you know what, you're fine, you're not a priority, we're just going to let you stay here, and we're going to basically turn the other cheek and just stay out of trouble, and you can stay in the United States. Now what's happening is that people are going to their court hearing. I was reading a case of a person, and this is happening a lot. People are telling the judge, I am afraid to go back to my home country. I'm afraid that I will be killed if I go back to my home country. And the judge says, okay, we're going to schedule you for another hearing. This is what you need to do. And then the government attorney, the ICE, or it's not ICE, DHS attorney, has a chance to, respond. And what's happening is that the DHS attorney is saying, we're gonna end the case. We're going to close their case. It's fine. We're going to close your case. And so for a lot of people, that feels like a good thing, right? You're no longer in deportation proceedings. The government isn't trying to deport me. But the fact of being in deportation proceedings provides some sort of protection. You're in deportation proceedings, so the government's not going to deport you. We're going to give you your day in court. We're going to let you explain why you should stay. And at the end of that, we're going to issue a court order to say yes or no. So in these hearings, the judge is, proceeding, and the government lawyer is saying, you know what, we're going to move to close the case. We're going to terminate proceedings right now. So a lot of times people are like, oh, this is great. They don't want to deport me anymore. But what that does is it stops the protection that they have from being deported because they're in court. So the report that I was reading, there was an undercover ICE agent in the courtroom. When they hear that the judge has dismissed the case, they text their buddy standing out in the hall, also a uniformed officer maybe. And as soon as the person steps out in the hallway, they're getting arrested. In fact, a friend of mine who is a psychologist, and she's working as a volunteer accompanying people to their court hearings, on her very first day, this is what happened. The person's case was dismissed. They walked into the lobby of the courthouse in New York City, and the person was arrested right in front of her. So this is what the U.S. government, the regime, is doing to people right now who are doing everything that they should be doing, following the rules. They're showing up in court, and they're getting arrested. As an attorney, we're not allowed to tell people to break the law. They are obligated to show up in court. But if I were telling anybody right now, and if this person did not have a lawyer, I would say don't go to court. Because the thing is, if you don't go to court, you get a deportation order. But if you do go to court, you might get deported today. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, is what's happening. And the U.S. government is is forcing people to either break the law by not showing up, or they show up and they do everything right and they get deported anyway, and they're getting sent to who knows where. I'm sorry? Yeah, it's absolutely deliberate what they're doing, 100%. It's, when Trump was running for president, he was talking about, deporting everybody. And the fact of the matter is, prior to the big, beautiful bill, there wasn't the money to do that. But all you need to do is scare a few people. You deport a few people, you do a little bit of horrible, unconstitutional stuff, and then everybody is afraid, right? And then they end up leaving. Do any of you know people who have come back to Mexico, even though they've not been deported, but just because they're afraid, right? So that's definitely happening, and that's one way for them to get what they're looking for. The regime just wants to get rid of all of the immigrants, and they don't really care how that happens. So the next question in our quiz, let's see, we have the asylum seekers in court. There we go. Is it constitutional? Would you deport somebody to a torture site? Yes or no? Okay, I'm going to admit that this is all very, very biased because I don't really know how, I was actually talking to Corrine, what am I going to do with this presentation? And her suggestion for the title of it was, we're fucked. So I made it a little bit nicer. I'm trying to be a little bit, upbeat on this whole thing, but the U.S. government is deporting people to torture sites. Migrants have been shipped to CICOT in El Salvador. The U.S. government has been sending people to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba since February. And recently, 8 men who had previously been held in a shipping container were sent to Sudan. None of these men have any connection whatsoever to Sudan. They were from Asia and Latin American countries. They supposedly were the worst of the worst. They're from countries that the U.S. government may or may not have diplomatic relations with in order to send them back home, or their government's like, no, we're not going to take them. So the U.S. government is sending them to Sikot, Sudan, and Guantanamo Bay. They're using this as an effort to expel people to so-called third countries when the U.S. law bars people from people being sent to their home countries. So if you're from Cuba, you can't, and you're saying, I'm afraid to go to Cuba, they're like, okay, no problem, we'll send you to Sudan instead. So this is their way to get around these rules. And South Sudan is a country that the U.S. government has issued a do not travel warning to because of civil unrest and violence. So no, of course, you're not going to deport somebody to a torture site because it violates the 8th Amendment. There's also not only is this unconstitutional, does this violate the U.S. Constitution, but it violates U.S. International legal obligations. The United States is a signatory to the Convention Against Torture, which prohibits sending somebody to a country where they are afraid of being tortured, where they may be harmed. That's a principle called non-refoulement, which is a French word. The United States is bound by this, but we're doing it anyway. The 8th Amendment says that we can't deport people because that would maybe be considered cruel and unusual punishment. And there is U.S. case law that has set standards for people seeking asylum and set standards to not send people back to countries where they're afraid. So absolutely, this is illegal under U.S. Constitution, under the U.S. Constitution, and under U.S. international obligations. The next one, here's a fun one, is alligator Alcatraz constitutional? So for those of you who are unaware, alligator Alcatraz opened last week, 2 weeks ago. I think it opened on July 3rd. There are 700 people who have been sent there or are scheduled to be sent there. And this place is it's a temporary place. It's an airstrip in the middle of the Everglades. So there are so many problems with what's happening there. First of all, it was built in 8 days. These are temporary tents, heavy-duty tents, but they're temporary tents that they have. It's in the middle of sensitive environmental areas. It's sacred land to the Native Americans who occupy these lands. And the U.S. government thought it'd be cute to call it alligator Alcatraz using this, natural protections, just like Alcatraz was supposedly an inescapable place. So is alligator Alcatraz supposed to be? But another point is that it's the Florida state government built it. Governor DeSantis built it using Florida money, and they hope to be reimbursed by FEMA, of course, because it's a federal emergency. And they hope to be reimbursed by FEMA for the money that they've spent. It's costing $245 per day to house people in alligator Alcatraz, and that adds up to roughly $450 million in operating expenses for the first year to put people in these tents. So alligator Alcatraz, anybody hear about what the situation, what the conditions there are like? A group of lawmakers recently visited, and there are some reports coming out from people who are being detained there that the lights are on 24 hours a day. They get maybe one meal a day, and that meal has maggots in it. People are not allowed to shower. There's like cages, and I think I can't remember how many people are in each cage, but it's basically cages with bunk beds. I was in Munich over Christmas and had a chance to visit Auschwitz, and this looked very much like that, the way that they're describing. Just a bunch of beds and nothing else. And actually, I can't remember if we saw bathrooms there, but the bathrooms, there are 3 toilets in the cell for the 35 people, and they're just out in the open. And this is like you and I being sent to there and you having to, and showers. Showers are also not private. So you have toilets that are not private, you have showers not private, if you have showers. When Trump visited and inspected Alligator Alcatraz, it flooded because it's in the middle of a swamp. And there's either no air conditioning or it's freezing cold in this place. So would you consider that to be constitutional, to send people here? Absolutely not.
We should call it
Alligator Auschwitz. I think, yes. And in fact, the definition of a concentration camp, does anybody know what the definition of a concentration camp is? A concentration camp, and this is from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language. A concentration camp is a camp where persons are confined, usually without hearings, and typically under harsh conditions, often as a result of their membership in a group the government has identified as suspect. So yeah, I think that this could be. I mean, the only difference between Auschwitz is we don't have the gas chambers yet. There's also, you know, Auschwitz was built for, I don't know, 2,000 people, and they ended up having 10,000 people there. The Alligator Alcatraz, I think, was built for it's currently supposed to house 3,000 people. They expect to house about 5,000 people soon. By the beginning of July was the reports that I read, which is now. So yeah, the definition, I would say that Alligator Alcatraz absolutely meets the definition of a concentration camp. So yes, it is cruel and unusual punishment. It violates the Fifth Amendment against due process because people are just being shipped there without being sentenced to a term of incarceration, as people who are sentenced to prison should be. But migrants are just being sent there to be held. The extreme conditions absolutely violate the ban on cruel and unusual punishment. There's also a law, the Flores Agreement, which determines the detention of children, and it says that children can't be held for a certain amount of time, and it mandates the humane treatment of detained minors. Currently, as far as I know, there aren't any minors being held at Alligator Alcatraz, but there's also not supposed to be any legal people, people who are documented, held at Alligator Alcatraz. And recently I read about a DACA recipient, a person who was brought to the United States as a young, under the age of 18, brought to the United States, and he was sent to Alligator Alcatraz. He was fully documented and should not be there at all. So yes, Alligator Alcatraz, cruel and unusual, unconstitutional. The next question in our quiz, is it constitutional? Under what conditions can the U.S. government revoke citizenship? We maybe have heard, well actually, so having a meme mocking J.D. Vance on your phone, has anybody, I wish I had a picture of that. B, lying on your citizenship application. C, protesting the genocide in Gaza. Or D, committing murder. Anybody have any ideas on which one of this will get you your citizenship revoked? What is it? B? B is lying on your citizenship application. Yes, that is the one that will will have the government, justifies the government stripping you of your citizenship. This is naturalization. This is separate from people who are born in the United States. These are people who were born elsewhere, came to the United States, went through the process, the long, expensive, complicated, arduous process of becoming a citizen, and they are being threatened with revocation of their citizenship, including the, is it the mayoral candidate of New York City, the socialist, that the regime is threatening to take away his citizenship just because he's, I don't know, they've not said anything that he's lied to get his citizenship, but this absolutely would be violative of the Fifth Amendment right to due process. Taking citizenship away from somebody is an incredibly should be an incredibly difficult procedure, and it's only allowed for fraudulent cases, and it should not be, not arbitrarily at all. It also violates the 14th Amendment for equal protection because discriminatory denaturalization is illegal. Just because somebody is a socialist doesn't mean that you should take away their citizenship. And there is actually case law that talks about the circumstances under which somebody can lose their citizenship. So yes, taking away citizenship is a 14th Amendment violation and a 5th Amendment violation. So another question, is it constitutional? Can the president unilaterally end birthright citizenship? Do you remember on day one, that was one of his day one executive orders that he was going to end birthright citizenship? Yes or no? How many people say yes? Oh, no. On January 20th, Trump signed the executive order titled, and it's so Orwellian, right? Protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. And he said that the federal government is not going to issue birth certificates, basically documents that recognize United States citizenship, birth certificates, to any children born on American soil to parents who were in the country unlawfully or were in the country lawfully but temporarily. So that would get rid of, what is it called? A lot of women from China will come to the United States to give birth. A lot of people, this is supposedly a thing. People come to the U.S., have their children in the United States, and that child is a U.S. citizen. Anchor babies, yeah, exactly. So they're not going to issue, they're telling states not to give birth certificates to those people, which just really leads to a whole bunch of other issues, like what if the child's not a citizen of the U.S., where are they a citizen of? Are you going to then, ask for the documentation, the citizenship paper of every single woman giving birth in a hospital? What about people who have children at home with the midwife? How is all of that stuff going to work? So this one is absolutely unconstitutional, but for a different reason. This one speaks specifically, the 14th Amendment specifically says people born in the United States are U.S. citizens. This requires a constitutional amendment. This is not something that the president can just say, oh, I don't want to do this, we're going to just not give birth certificates to them. This requires a constitutional amendment. And for those of you who have fought for your whole life for the Equal Rights Amendment, know how hard it is to pass to get an amendment changed. So there was a case in 1898, the one that I was talking about, when we talked about the 14th Amendment, which upheld birthright citizenship. So this is a long-standing case. Of course, Roe v. Wade was also a very long-standing case, and we thought that that was okay. So this, stripping people of birthright citizenship is unconstitutional unless the 14th Amendment is repealed or reinterpreted by the Supreme Court, which, I'm not going to say is not going to ever happen. We have a bonus round here. Can the government arrest journalists for covering ICE activities? Absolutely they can. National security comes first. Only if they leak classified information, not if they work for Fox News, and never, thanks to the First Amendment. Anybody have any answers? Yeah, there we go. The First Amendment absolutely protects journalists unless they directly incite violence or they break specific laws. And that was something that the Pentagon Papers case, the New York Times versus the US in 1971, said that you can't do that. But nonetheless, Trump and what is she called? Ice Barbie, Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, have openly threatened CNN for criminal prosecution because they're reporting on an app called Ice Block. This is an app, if you have friends in the US, reports on ICE activities in certain places. And CNN is reporting on the existence of this app, and now they're being threatened with criminal prosecutions for just doing their job, for reporting on something. So this is very, very unprecedented. Trump's assault on the press is not a sideshow. This is the main thing. It's not a distraction, it's the whole game. When you can control the narrative, you get to control the whole country. You can silence dissent, and you can do anything. So know that the purpose of Trump's police state is not just immigrants, but it's everybody. Do not be intimidated or discouraged from speaking out or writing or saying stuff, because we absolutely need to continue that fight. We need to fight against the illegal, unconscionable things that the regime is doing right now. So in light of that, I created a new poem, an updated poem. First, they came for the immigrants, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't an immigrant. Then they came for the trans people, but I didn't speak out because I wasn't trans. Then they came for the journalists, calling them enemies of the people, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a journalist. Then they came for the protesters, and I did not speak up because I stayed at home. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. And the camps were already built. When I was preparing this, a friend asked, what's the point? What good are court cases if the regime chooses to ignore judges' orders and even go so far as to arresting judges, which you may have remembered happened in the not too distant past. The judge was sending an immigrant out the side door so to avoid being detected by ICE. So is the rule of law dead? I would say right now, no, not yet, and hopefully it won't be, because we are having victories. In fact, last week, a federal judge stepped in and temporarily blocked the Department of Homeland Security from conducting these broad, untargeted immigration stops and arrests in California. This was actually, I think, on Thursday, when they went to MacArthur Park, where there was maybe some children playing, but not really, but they came at it like a military operation, and that may or may not have been the tipping point. I feel like there's been so many tipping points, and we just keep gotta hoping that, you know, the culmination of all these tipping points is gonna have some effect. So last week, a judge issued an order prohibiting DHS from making arrests based solely on racial profiling tactics, such as somebody's race, their accent, where they're working, where they're hanging out, or just being present in a certain location, you know, where they're hanging out. So the decision says that the government can conduct large-scale operations, large-scale immigration enforcements in LA, but it also said that everyone, regardless of their immigration status, is protected by the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment, and that targeting Latino communities with these warrantless arrests, with the racial profiling, without any reasonable suspicion that they are without status, and denying people access to lawyers actually is constitutional. Also, another case, a federal judge, again last week, issued a new nationwide block against the executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship. So that's okay, that's good for now. And again in July, so a couple weeks ago, last week, a federal judge ruled that the Trump administration can't deny people entry, cannot deny entry to people crossing the southern border to apply for asylum. That is a very, you know, this is really the only way that a lot of people can access the protection that supposedly the United States offers. The next slide shows that the lower courts, and this graphic is from March, but lower courts in the United States have blocked more Trump orders in the first 2 months of his administration than were blocked for recent presidents in their entire term. Trump has had 15 of his executive orders blocked. So the judiciary is doing its job. Hopefully the guardrails have really been beaten and battered, but hopefully there will be enough people continuing this and continuing to speak out and uphold it. So my question to you, and I'm sure that you're all wondering, is what do we do? I never like to end any presentation on this really morose, depressing note, and it's definitely overwhelming to take in or to witness all the injustices that are happening right now. The good news, if you want to call it that, is that all of this stuff is connected. So if we're doing something in our little corner that is pulling at the strings of what's happening, it's going to contribute to the unraveling of it all, right? We have to keep doing something. I'm going to tell you, please don't give up. We cannot. this is where I get emotional. We absolutely cannot give up. I don't think that it's useful to be gloom and doom and saying, you know, I assume we all live here in Mexico, and, you know, I moved here when Trump was elected the first time because of that reason, because it was very overwhelming and difficult, and I didn't want to continue being there. But just giving up isn't an option, nor is just this, you know, Pollyanna-ish positivity, like, of course something is going to happen. You know, I think what this moment calls for more than anything right now is just hope. You know, just, we have to have hope. We have to keep hope, because really, what alternative is there? We can't give up. You know, it's okay, it's cool, it's good to care. It's good to be, you know, a source of inspiration for somebody. It's good to be, you know, I'm not saying to stick your head in the ground and pretend it's not happening, because that's not good either. But, you know, we have to keep hoping, because authoritarianism thrives on apathy. When we give up, when we stop paying attention, they get to do, you know, the Washington Post, I moved here from the DC area, and the Washington Post was my local paper. And I was so proud when they, under their banner, said democracy dies in darkness, because that absolutely is true. Of course, they died in full view of everybody when, you know, who is it, Bezos owns it and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, authoritarianism does thrive on an apathy, so pay attention, keep paying attention, and do something, do a small act. Even a small act is going to make a difference. You know, I like to say that we're not going to change the world. I recognize that I'm not going to change the world, but I absolutely know that I can change the world for one person, and I hope to call on you guys to do exactly the same thing. All of you can absolutely change the world for one person. What does that mean? For those of you who may be joining us from the United States, you know, there are things that you can do. Court cases, immigration courts are open to the public. You can go, you can witness, you can bear witness, you can, you know, accompany people, because it's very scary going to court by yourself, and most immigrants don't have a lawyer to accompany them. So, you know, look for, most big cities have an immigration court there. You can call up, find out when their non-detained docket is. You can go and accompany people, and you can document what you see. Because another thing that this regime is doing is definitely gaslighting us and making us think that what is happening is not actually happening. So the more of us who can witness, who can document what's happening, who can report on what's happening, is going to be absolutely, you know, is worth something. You may not see the effect of it right away, but there hopefully will be an effect. The second thing everybody probably says is, you know, is advocacy. Call your representative. Tell them you see what's happening. Tell them that you don't agree with what's happening. I found this great training called 1 Million Rising. It's strategic non-cooperation to fight authoritarianism. I don't have this up on here, but I'm happy to send it. It's a training organized by mobilize.us, mobilize.us is the website, and they're, you know, thinking, you know, they're working on training people on how to fight back against this, and I've come to the conclusion that at this point we absolutely need nonviolent resistance. We need non-cooperation. What's the word that I'm looking for? We need you know, activism, you know, Gandhi, all of those people, Martin Luther King, the things that they were doing, we need that now. You know, just demanding to see a warrant isn't going to stop ICE from picking up your neighbor. But maybe, you know, and in fact, what I've heard, what reports I've read of people surrounding ICE and shaming them into leaving, so that can be effective. You know, these are people too, as much as they've covered their faces and made them look like they're not people, they are people, and hopefully appealing to their better side, you know, reminding them that, you know, following orders is not a valid defense to breaking the law. So I would encourage all of you to think globally and act locally. So here, what you can do in San Miguel, just being part of that thread that pulls at the whole corrupt global regime, is do something here. We're lucky in San Miguel. We have the most per capita nonprofit organizations in all of Mexico. I'm on the board of the Latin American Relief Fund. We support the migrant shelter in Celaya. You can donate to us. We're building a new shelter. In fact, we think that the administration should be donating to us, because we're going to keep people we're going to help people stay in Mexico and not go to the United States. So you can donate to the Latin American Relief Fund. You can donate. 100 Women Who Care is coming up next week, I think, is their meeting. You donate 1,000 pesos, and they collectively make a huge difference by contributing to a local nonprofit. Mujeres en Cambio helps people go to school. Patronato Pro Niños helps, provides medical assistance to people. There are so many nonprofits here. Even saving dogs, even going to walk dogs at Control Canino helps some way. In the face of all of this injustice and all of this hatred, I think what we can do our own act of defiance by being good people and doing something to contribute to the good. So that's what we can do.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can I ask a question?
Thank you very much. And we're going to, in a minute, open it up for questions and answers. But because I have the microphone, I'm going to make a couple of comments. And one thing that I wanted to say is there's a 4-letter word that you didn't mention is fear. And that's what all of this is about. Fear creates apathy, and you feel I can't do anything, and so forth and so on. And we can't give in to that fear. And you mentioned things that people in the United States can do. Well, there are a lot of people who are maybe even have a green card, don't have a green card, whatever. They're afraid to go out. So you can help people buy groceries, take their children to school. There's things like that which really will help people, because right now many people are not able to do that. They were just afraid to go to a little thing like going to the grocery store and so forth. And one thing you mentioned with on the Constitution, of course, is Trump things, and his regime, his myrmidons, think that the Constitution does not apply to non-citizens. And a lot of people believe that. I mean, good people, and people, because we're ignorant and we don't know, which is why it was very good that you talked about the Constitution. But in fact, it does. And it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or not. And also, they're not criminals breaking criminal law. It's a civil infraction. And if more people knew that, it would, I think, make a difference. So the United States, unfortunately, has been doing this for a long time. During the First World War, Eugene Debs, a socialist and presidential candidate, was put in jail because he was arguing against the First World War. After the Russian Revolution and during the first Red Scare in the 20s, people, anarchists, socialists like Andrew Bergman, other people, were thrown out of the country also, completely illegally, and sent to the Soviet Union and to other places. So this is not something new. Study your American history, despite what Trump and other people, because you don't want to know about these bad things. This has been going on for a long time, and okay, I'm now going to shut up. Okay, people would like to.
Okay.
Tina Rosa, please, you have a question for Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Very much appreciate all the work you do. I was wondering, there is this July 17th celebration of Good Trouble Lives On in the U.S. going on all over the country. And I was wondering if it's okay for me as a a resident, a permanent resident, to go and just walk around in front of the U.S. consulate with a sign that is in support of that activity and that movement and that resistance to the regime?
So, as foreigners in Mexico, there is an absolute prohibition against us participating in political activities, and that includes political activities that are in support or in opposition to other countries. So, you know, there was the No King's Day. There was another demonstration, a protest up at the U.S. consulate, and I think, you know, the local government looks the other way, but by following the letter of the law, that is prohibited, unfortunately. But that said, there are people who are standing in front of Mercado Sano on Saturdays holding signs, you know, and people do it anyway. I like to think of, or I recognize that Mexico is really good at passing laws. They're not so great at enforcing them. So, you know, if you want to protest in front of the U.S. consulate on that day, know that it does violate the law, but so does many other things happening here. So it's up to you.
Did you have a second question?
Yeah, my understanding was that prohibition against political activity was in getting involved in Mexican politics. I didn't realize that it applied to being a supporter of activities in the United States political realm.
Yeah, when I was reading it just before the No King's Day, that's the conclusion that I saw other people reaching. I don't know Mexican law, so I can't speak to that. But my understanding is that any political activity, whether it's criticizing Mexican politics or any other politics, falls under that prohibition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience here or in the audience in the cloud? Not at the moment. Oh.
Thank you. That was a good talk. You mentioned in one of the bullet points about campesinos in the United States making up 75% of the workforce. I thought I'd heard something, and I don't know if you'd.
This one.
Anyway, that Trump had heard from agribusiness in the same way that he veers around with his tariffs when his fellow oligarchs contact him, and that there would be some possibility that we would go back to something like the Bracero program or something where they're going to get, you know, special attention to be exploited in the workplace, but at least they would be able to stay. Have you heard anything about that sector of the immigrant population?
What I have heard is, I mean, how much faith can we give into any statements that he makes? But he was talking about a situation where business owners vouched for people and kind of claimed workers, like, I'm going to vouch for them and I'm going to be responsible for them. But that's kind of the only thing that I've heard of. And that whole vouching thing is problematic in itself because it kind of leads to, you know, it creates this system where the business owner is sort of the owner of that worker as well, right? That I can do whatever I want if I'm going to vouch for you, and if you don't work for me for, you know, if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to, you know, send you on your way. It's kind of creating a slavery-like situation or potential for slavery-like abuses in the system, but I haven't heard of a Bracero type of program.
No, I just want to thank both of you for having this discussion and information. It's really important. You touched on so many things that I'll just try to keep it short short and sweet and organized and focused. But I'm a journalist. I work for the New Humanitarian, which was an offshoot of the UNHCR. So I worked in many countries, Egypt for a while, Kenya during the Moi years, and Mubarak years in Egypt, South Africa years ago, and apartheid. So what I want to say is, yes, it must be approached legally, but at the same time, when you opened up and said this is a regime, almost like a coup. So the legality aspect is there and it's not there. Obviously, right? It's right in front of our face. So one colleague of mine, I won't mention her name, she's pretty well known, but she said, we can't approach this as everything, it's normal. These are extraordinary times, so we must, I'm not advocating for any violence or anything, but must think outside the box and how we approach this. And you're absolutely right. Through legal means, through information, I do documentaries, so getting that information out there, but also anticipating that they don't follow the same moral values or legal precedents that we're set. They're not. So you have to think like the people around you think. How do we approach this? So being creative in our approach to doing this, and maybe, like you say, you don't want to think of doomsday, but there's also this precedent of some people want to destroy the country as we know it. So, then you have the Supreme Court, which gets into a whole nother sad, vision of where the country's going. Because when you're talking about some of the judges that are doing this, and it's great, but you know what's going to happen. They're going to run right up to Mrs. Barrett and others that, or rationalize these laws, these unconstitutional dynamics in a very legalistic, logical way, which is total hypocrisy, as we know it. So I just moved down here after the second election. I lived in Silver Spring when you mentioned it also. So yes, I think we just need to approach it in a myriad of different ways and keep fighting, because what they want to do, Bannon and others, because Trump is not strategically that intelligent. So we know that, right? It's other people behind him. Look at the root and don't look at the branches. Sometimes we get confused by looking at the branches. And what they do deliberately is they keep coming this way and throwing this at it. And it's, as any fascist regime, and I'm speaking from experience, is to wear you out, to wear you down, where you're just saying, oh, look at the root, you won't become distracted. And that's the key, and I think that's what you're doing. So, that we do that. So thank you for that. I took up enough time. I did want to drop off my cards because I'm interested in what the Latin legal that you're working with, so I would love to know more about that and perhaps visit if possible. So thank you.
Thanks for your comment. I agree. Like, I think of, what's happening now, and I think of that scene in the Hunger Games, if you've seen the movie, where they're like going into the battleground and they come up and they get to choose their weapon, and the Democrats ran to the Constitution and grabbed it, and the Republicans ran and got a chainsaw. Like, how are we supposed to fight that? Like, it's totally, and I think during the Cold War, the U.S. government published a little handbook on how to be subversive, and it was geared towards people under the communist bloc, but it's totally applicable now. And have you seen the image of, I think it was the State Department, and they said, those of you who are staying behind, resist. Do what you can to resist. And there are so many ways, and this is where I also get really frustrated of all these, low-level people carrying out the policies. They can stop. There's tons of ways to resist, and there's tons of ways within your own square, within your own box, to mess it up. Absolutely, the lack of moral courage. Absolutely, people are being completely cowardly. But you need it for the people watching, yeah.
I guess I believe the power is with the people, like he was saying. And I think at the moment, because we can't give up hope, the power that we have is to convince, what are we, 48%? And it was 51 that one, if I got my math right or wrong, whatever it is. We've got to somehow, it's hearts and minds. How can we convince that other percentage to come over to our side? At this point, we are a voice, but we are not the majority voice. And so we don't have enough power. We have power, and it can grow. But can we grow it enough to convince the people who still believe in Trump that he is an emperor that wears no clothes? I believe that when that day comes, we'll have a better opportunity to create a downfall. But at this point, without the other people on our side, you can't push the wall down. Not yet.
Absolutely, and I think that part of that is breaking the disinformation machine. I mean, we have Fox News lying constantly, and OAM, you know, all of these bad reports coming, you know, people spewing lies that people are listening to. And until we can combat that, it's going to be really hard to convince everybody else that they're actually being duped.
Sí, gracias. Voy a tomar el rótulo de tu playera. Ningún ser humano es ilegal. Entonces,
Taking a line from my shirt, no human is illegal.
yeah, the thing that I would like to stress is a sort of confusion, because one of my questions would be, what kind of laws are directed precisely to the how do you say, migrants, to the migrants? Because I have heard that their fault is civilian, is not a crime really. But the confusion is that what sort of specific laws deals with this sort of failure or how do you say? And the complementary point of view is Mexican government or many Latin American countries who are seeing that their people who somehow went to the United States as migrants are having really hard time. So in practical terms, what sort of pressure these governments can do?
I think that's a hard question to answer, because the U.S. is the giant on the global stage, and you know, with one comment, you know, threatening tariffs, and everybody cows down to them, and I think that's a really hard thing to do. So I actually don't know. There's not like a specific law that says, you know, undocumented migrants are protected. You know, there's the Constitution applies to them. But it's Trump's MO to break the law. Who cares? Sue me. In the meantime, he gets away with whatever he's doing. And then even at the end, they're like, you were wrong. You broke the law. And he's like, okay. But in the meantime, he's gotten rid of millions or, you know, hundreds of thousands of migrants. So I think that's just the way he operates. I don't know that legally that there's something that can be done about that, other than the judges holding the line, continuing to follow the law, and we just have to hope that there's more judges that grow a spine and stand up for what they need to be standing up for, the Constitution.
Protest, organize,
Yeah.
protest.
Absolutely.
Because law doesn't mean anything to him. I'm from New York, and I know people who did business with him, and I knew, for instance, a plumber worked for him, and he wouldn't pay him what he was supposed to be paid, and he said, or his minions said, Well, I don't care. We've got 6 law firms on retainer. So go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And now we have
Screw
that
you.
on a national
on the
level
national-
with the
international-
with the big law firms having
international
bent
level.
over.
I grew up in Atlantic City, close to him.
Yeah.
This lady says here, remember he built a home around the building, he didn't want to move, didn't pay the construction workers, and he said, oh, okay, help her, we'll just build around her. It was sentimental value to the home that she had. So that's
Thank you for coming.
well, I guess we're,
I'm sorry? How do I find out about this discussion? I walked in by accident. Here we go, email list.
I believe we're out of
I
time.
think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, very much, and thank everybody who listened. And by the way, please return your copies of the Constitution,
Yes.
or you'll be facing a civil case. I think there's 2 more out there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.